With its fourth part, Diamond is Unbreakable, currently airing, I figured now was as good a time as any to start talking about the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime. To be honest, in terms of the anime, I'm only halfway through part 3 at the moment, so that's going to have to come later. So this time we're only talking about the first season, which features parts 1 and 2, Phantom Blood and Battle Tendency. Starting us off, and perhaps being the weakest part in the entire series, Phantom Blood doesn't really know what it wants to be. It opens up as that form of Japanese horror which, as opposed to being absolutely terrifying, just isn't really anything at all. It starts with this home invasion tale which leads eventually to vampirism and ancient cults. The art style in both the comic and the anime reflect this. They feature lots of grotesqueries. A lot of the art just simply isn't very appealing. And it might be intentional, or it might just be Araki not being quite into his groove yet. Out of nowhere, it seems to become the battle story that we'll see later in other parts. Jonathan Joestar learns to fight properly, learns the magic system for the first 2 parts in the form of the Hamon Ripple, marches off to change the tone of the anime completely. I don't think there's a lot to recommend in part 1, as far as the story goes. It's actually fairly weak, I think. You see the beginnings of a lot of the Araki insanity that you will see in later parts of JoJo. But this seems the most tame, and the most meh. A lot of the character designs aren't as creative as we'll see later on. Araki himself admits that Jonathan Joestar is essentially Kenshiro from Hakuto no Ken, but in a different time. He's this ultimate beefcake who is a pure and good soul. There isn't a lot of real characterization to him besides the fact that he's good and Dio is evil, thus making Dio more of the star of the piece. He goes through the most character development. Although the anime is very keen to point out he's simply inherently evil, he does develop and have his moments where he has to go to more extreme measures to get what he wants. The secondary cast outside of our 2 main characters are pretty throwaway. Characters come and go. They're introduced to merely be taken away instantly. The character of Dyer in particular seems to mostly be there for a rock and roll pun and to then demonstrate that Dio is an absolute badass, since he gets killed almost straight away. The character Zappelli should be a really cool character that you see a lot of. After teaching Jojo a thing or two, he doesn't really do much, and is again more fodder to demonstrate how Dio is an absolute badass. There are some fairly creative and interesting battles, for example the battles with the knights. It's all a bit simple, whereas later on things will get very elaborate and quite interesting. Regarding the animation this season in general, I love it. The simple fact that it goes panel for panel accurate. It's like watching a motion comic, almost, but with a bit more motion. Considering how cheesy the material is, the voice cast pull it off. And I love the fact that throughout JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, in the dramatic moments the colour palettes change and go crazy. It looks amazing. The opening theme works very well as well. It brings forth memories of older anime series, the likes from the 80s and 90s, with the big bombastic horns and silly over-the-top vocals. But otherwise, this is definitely the lesser part. It's necessary to watch it because it gives good background on later stuff, but in no way is it as good as Battle Tendency or Stardust Crusaders. Speaking of Battle Tendency, Joseph Joestar is probably my favourite JoJo of them all. While Phantom Blood seemed to lack character, Battle Tendency has it in abundance, almost to a fault. The supporting cast are interesting and relevant. Sure, there are some characters who are there simply to die, but there are more and more that are these epic heroes who just come back for more every time. Having Caesar Zappelli develop alongside JoJo makes it incredibly endearing. Lisa is a great all-knowing master character, and von Stroheim is just fantastic for how many times he comes back from losing all of his limbs and seemingly his life. The bad guys also seem to take a notch higher, whereas in Phantom Blood it was Jojo who was the over-honourable, too pure character. In Battle Tendency, the Pillar Men seem to be like characters from an ancient Greek tragedy, horrendous in their own ways, but seemingly strangely honourable, going to extreme lengths simply because they want to have decent battles. Speaking of, the battles are significantly better here, possibly because there's fewer of them, so they can have bigger and more elaborate fights. But this has the problem when you have AC/DC and Wham's fights that are these great, intricate, amazing set pieces, to then finish with Cars, who feels almost like an anticlimax in some ways, which is strange considering how ridiculous and epic the fight gets. Back here as well are the palette changes with dramatic moments, and they are also just amazing. I love how Araki's art changed in Battle Tendency, and how he begins to show his ridiculous spirit. Throughout Jojo's Bizarre Adventure there are amazing ridiculous poses which make no sense. Araki used male models as his reference pictures, and this honestly is where a lot of Jojo's identity is. Within the first season, nowhere is this more evident than in Battle Tendency, where you have these ridiculous beefcakes doing effeminate male model poses. The focus and actual in-depth training art work in its favour. As I've said, the battles are better, and in general, this Jojo is a lot more relatable. He's not a perfectly pure human being. He's a bit cowardly, he does ridiculous tricks. It feels almost unfair that he almost always wins through just being that little bit brighter. Seems to spend the entire section just showing up overconfident people. The voice cast here also do the same fantastic job given the very cheesy and ridiculous plot that they're given. As will constantly be seen, the plots here are all ridiculous and mad, but that's part of the charm. Regarding the sound across this series as a whole, I honestly wonder why more anime shows don't end up using old prog rock songs. Roundabout by Yes is fantastic. It manages to have suitable moments for every situation. On a high note, on a low note, everywhere. They seem to manage to fit this song in and it works fantastically. The opening theme as well for part 2 is fantastic. I absolutely love it. It's so stylish, it's so swanky. It's very strange because it almost gives off a swinging 60s vibe to me. Although I suspect it's more meant to be about the extensive jazz which was around in the early part of the 20th century. The opening is a feast for the eyes. Whereas part 1's opening looked a little bit like an opening cinematic for a video game, part 2 looks amazing. To the point where I've had to put the theme on my phone just because it's just that amazing. Since I haven't finished watching part 3, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I'm hoping will happen. Having read the manga, I know that the plot moves in a fantastic direction. It begins to really get into the groove of the series' iconography. The stands come in, which will become the main form of battle for the rest of the series. We see Kujo Jotaro, our first Japanese Jojo, who, let's all admit, is an absolute badass. And as a simple show and travelogue adventure, it's an amazing, amazing part to the series. I'm also looking forward to Diamond is Unbreakable simply because that one goes overboard on how creative the stands get. But in general, I feel that this series as a whole has more than enough good material to make a long-running anime series which is going to carry on being amazing for quite a while to come. Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Review Part 2. People get thinner and thinner and more badass. Coming soon. Yeah, I couldn't manage the lyrics on that one.
It can't be!
I'd say the rope magic worked. I laid my trap carefully so that even if the string was cut, it would still function.